I knew something was wrong the moment my son stood up to make a toast. He had that look on his face, the one he gets when he's about to announce something he's already decided without asking anyone. The Thanksgiving table was set beautifully. I'll give my daughter-in-law credit for that. But I noticed my chair had been placed at the corner, half facing the wall, while everyone else sat comfortably around the polished oak. The turkey smell filled the room, mixing with the expensive candles. Rebecca always insisted on lighting, 23 years of marriage to my son, and she still treated gatherings like performances rather than family moments. "Everyone," my son Kevin said, tapping his glass with a fork, "I have some exciting news." I set down my napkin and watched him. At 47, he still had his father's jawline but none of his father's warmth. Somewhere along the years, the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard had transformed into a man who calculated every interaction. "We've been talking with a developer," he continued, his arm around Rebecca's shoulders, "and we've decided to sell the lake house." The words hung in the air, like smoke. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my face still. The lake house. The place where my husband Richard built a dock with his own hands. The place where we spent 32 summers watching sunsets and teaching our children to fish. The place I still visited every month to sit in Richard's old rocking chair and feel close to him. "The developer is offering an incredible price," Rebecca added, her smile perfectly practiced. "With the market the way it is, we'd be foolish to pass it up." She glanced at me briefly, the way one glances at a piece of furniture that might not match the new decor. "It's really for the best, Dorothy." I looked around the table. My daughter Linda sat across from me, avoiding my eyes, picking at her mashed potatoes. Her husband Thomas stared at his plate. Even my granddaughter Maisie, 16, and usually full of opinions, seemed to shrink into her chair. "The lake house," I said quietly, "belongs to me." Kevin laughed, that dismissive sound he'd perfected over the years. "Mom, technically it was in Dad's name, and as his children, Linda and I have inheritance rights. We've already consulted a lawyer." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not surprise, not exactly. More like the final confirmation of something I had suspected for a long time. They had consulted a lawyer. They had talked to a developer. They had made plans for my home, for Richard's legacy. And no one had thought to pick up the phone and ask me what I wanted. "I see," I said. "It's a lot of money, Mom." Linda finally spoke, her voice thin. "Enough to help everyone. Kevin's business needs capital, and Thomas and I have been struggling with the mortgage, and no one considered telling me before announcing it at Thanksgiving dinner." I finished for her. "We didn't want to worry you," Rebecca said smoothly. "You've been through so much since Richard passed. We thought it would be easier if we handled everything." "Easier for whom?" I wanted to ask, but I didn't. Instead, I looked at the faces around the table, the faces of people I had spent my life nurturing, supporting, bailing out of trouble. Kevin's business had needed capital before, twice, and both times I had written the checks. Linda's mortgage had been struggling for 3 years, and I had quietly covered the gaps. Rebecca's new kitchen renovation, Thomas's car loan, the private school tuition for all 3 grandchildren. I had handled everything, always, without asking for recognition, without expecting anything in return, except perhaps a seat at the table that didn't face the wall. The turkey was dry, but I ate it anyway. I had learned long ago that telling the truth to people who don't want to hear it is just another way of wasting breath. Around me, the conversation shifted to the sale timeline, to investment strategies, to vacation plans funded by money from a house they didn't own. I sat in my corner and let the chatter wash over me like waves against a shore that had been eroding for years. After dinner, while Rebecca directed the cleanup like a general commanding troops, I slipped out to the back porch. The November air was sharp, carrying the smell of dead leaves and coming frost. I pulled my cardigan tighter and sat on the cold bench, letting the darkness settle around me. "Grandma?" Maisie appeared in the doorway, a dish towel still in her hands. She looked like I did at her age, before life taught me to make myself smaller. "Are you okay?" she asked, stepping outside. "You barely said anything at dinner." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just needed some air." She sat down next to me, close enough that our shoulders touched. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The stars were beginning to appear, pinpricks of light against the velvet sky. "They shouldn't have done that," Maisie said quietly. "Announced it like that, I mean, without asking you first." I looked at her, this girl who noticed things, who still saw me as a person rather than a problem to be managed. "No," I agreed. "They shouldn't have." "Is the lake house really theirs to sell?" I hesitated. The truth was complicated, tangled up in legal documents and emotional debts, and years of giving without boundaries. But Maisie deserved honesty. "Your grandfather left the house to me," I said. "Entirely. It's in my name. Has been since he updated his will 5 years before he died. He knew our children would eventually see dollar signs instead of memories. He wanted to make sure I had a place that was mine." Maisie's eyes widened. "So they can't actually sell it?" "No," I said. "They can't. But they don't know that. They never asked to see the will. They just assumed." She was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then, in a voice that reminded me so much of Richard, it made my heart ache. "Are you going to tell them?" I watched my breath form small clouds in the cold air. I thought about all the times I had smoothed things over, written checks, swallowed my feelings to keep the peace. I thought about the corner chair and the dry turkey and the way Rebecca had looked through me like I was already gone. "Not tonight," I said. "But soon. Some things are easier to understand when they're felt, not explained." Maisie nodded slowly, and I saw something in her eyes that looked like respect. She didn't ask more questions. She just sat with me in the cold until Rebecca's voice called her back inside, and even then she squeezed my hand before she left. That night, I drove home to my small apartment in the city, the one I'd moved into after Richard died, because the kids thought the family house was too big for me alone. They sold that too, I remembered. Split the proceeds 3 ways, giving me 1/3 of the home I'd lived in for 40 years. I hadn't protested then. I was too deep in grief to fight, and they promised they'd take care of me. They always promised. I didn't sleep well. Not from anger, though anger was there, simmering beneath the surface. It was something deeper, a reckoning that had been building for years and finally demanded to be faced. I lay in bed watching the shadows move across the ceiling and asked myself the question I had been avoiding for a decade. When did I stop being their mother and become their safety net? The answer came slowly, painfully, in fragments of memory. Kevin's first business failure, when he was 32 and too proud to admit he'd made mistakes. I had given him the money to start over, no questions asked. Linda's divorce, when she'd needed a place to stay, and I'd rented her an apartment for 2 years while she got back on her feet. Rebecca's insistence that the grandchildren needed the best education money could buy, and my quiet agreement to cover what their parents couldn't afford. Each gift had been given with love, but somewhere along the way, love had become expectation, and expectation had become entitlement. And I had allowed it all, because saying no to your children feels like saying you don't love them enough. But that isn't true. I know that now. Saying no is sometimes the deepest form of love there is. By morning, I had made my decision, not in a flash of anger, but in the quiet clarity that comes when you finally stop lying to yourself. I dressed carefully, choosing the navy blazer Richard had bought me for our 40th anniversary. Looking capable, he used to say, is half the battle. I drove to my bank and met with the manager, a woman named Patricia, who had handled my accounts for 15 years. I explained what I needed. She listened without interrupting, her pen moving steadily across her notepad. "You're certain about this?" she asked when I finished. "These changes are significant." "I'm certain," I said. It's overdue. We went through each item methodically. The automatic transfers to Kevin's business account, canceled. The monthly payments to Linda's mortgage, stopped. The credit card I'd added Rebecca to years ago for emergencies, frozen. The education fund I'd been contributing to for the grandchildren, redirected into a trust with conditions I would control. Patricia printed the paperwork. I signed each page with a steady hand, feeling something release in my chest with every stroke of the pen. The supplemental cards, Patricia said gently, the ones your children carry on your accounts, would you like those deactivated as well? I thought of Kevin's face at dinner, the casual entitlement in his voice. I thought of Rebecca's practiced smile and Linda's averted eyes. Yes, I said. All of them, effective immediately. Walking out of the bank, I felt lighter than I had in years. The autumn sun was pale but present, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment just breathing, just existing in a world where my money was finally my own again. The first phone call came before I reached my car. Mom. Kevin's voice was tight, confused. Something's wrong with my card. It got declined at a client lunch. Do you know anything about this? I let the phone ring out. Some lessons need to be learned without commentary. By evening, my phone had accumulated 17 missed calls and a cascade of text messages, each more frantic than the last. Kevin's confusion had turned to accusation. Linda's gentle inquiry had sharpened into panic. Rebecca hadn't called directly, but I could feel her presence behind Kevin's increasingly desperate messages. Mom, this isn't funny. The mortgage payment bounced. What did you do? The bank won't talk to me. I need you to call me right now. This is serious. I read each message once, then set the phone face down on my kitchen table. I made myself dinner, a simple soup with bread, and ate it by the window watching the city lights flicker on below. Somewhere across town, my children were discovering what it felt like to stand without a net beneath them. It wasn't cruelty that kept me from responding. It was necessity. They had spent so long leaning on me that they'd forgotten they had legs of their own. The next morning, a knock came at my door. Sharp, insistent, the kind of knock that expects the world to rearrange itself in response. Kevin stood in the hallway, his face a map of sleepless frustration. Behind him, Rebecca waited, arms crossed, her expression carefully composed into something between concern and accusation. Mom, Kevin said, pushing past me into the apartment. We need to talk about what's happening. I stepped aside, letting them enter. This was my space, small as it was, and I would not be rushed. Coffee? I offered. This isn't a social visit, Rebecca said. Kevin's business account was frozen. Our joint card was declined at the grocery store, in front of people. I nodded slowly, moving to the kitchen to start the coffee maker anyway. The machine hummed softly as I measured the grounds. I made some changes, I said, to my accounts. Changes? Kevin's voice rose. You call this changes? I had a client dinner last night. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was to have my card rejected? I turned to face him, leaning against the counter. He was so tall now, my son, but standing in my kitchen with that petulant expression, he looked remarkably like the teenager who used to sulk when I wouldn't buy him the latest sneakers. I imagine it felt something like being seated in the corner at Thanksgiving dinner, I said quietly, facing the wall while your family discusses selling your home without asking your permission. Kevin blinked. That's different. We were trying to help. You've been so scattered since Dad died, we thought. I cut him off. You thought I was too fragile to have a say in my own life. You thought you could manage me the way you manage your other investments. You thought wrong. Rebecca stepped forward, her voice taking on that smooth, reasonable tone I had grown to recognize as manipulation wrapped in silk. Dorothy, we understand you're upset, but punishing Kevin financially isn't going to solve anything. His business depends on that capital infusion. Without it, he'll have to find other investors, I finished for her. The way every other business owner does. The way he would have done years ago if I hadn't kept writing checks every time things got difficult. Mom, Kevin said, and for a moment his voice cracked into something younger, more vulnerable. I don't understand. Why are you doing this? I looked at him. Really looked. Seeing both the man he'd become and the boy he'd been. I thought of all the years I'd spent trying to smooth his path, trying to protect him from the consequences of his choices. Because I love you, I said. And loving you means I can't keep saving you from yourself. The coffee finished brewing. I poured myself a cup and sat down at my small kitchen table, gesturing for them to join me. Rebecca remained standing, but Kevin slowly sank into the chair across from mine. You love us, Rebecca repeated, her skepticism barely concealed. So you humiliate us. You sabotage Kevin's business. I raised my hand, and something in my expression made her stop. I have paid for Kevin's business twice, I said calmly. I have covered your mortgage payments for the last 18 months. I have funded renovations and vacations and school tuitions that were presented as necessities but were really luxuries none of you could afford. I did all of this quietly, without complaint, because I thought that's what mothers do. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being your mother and became your ATM, and no one noticed the difference. Kevin opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, he had no ready response. Thanksgiving dinner, I continued, was a gift. Not the kind you wanted, but the kind you needed. You announced the sale of my home, as if I were already dead. You didn't ask my opinion. You didn't consider my feelings. You had consulted lawyers and developers, while I was still visiting that lake house every month to feel close to your father. The lake house is in probate, Rebecca said quickly. We checked the records. Did you check the updated records? I asked mildly. The ones from 5 years ago, when your father-in-law changed his will specifically to protect that property? The ones that clearly state the house belongs entirely to me? Rebecca's face went pale. Kevin stared at me as if seeing a stranger. The lake house is mine, I said. It will remain mine until I decide otherwise. And when I die, it will go to someone who understands that homes are not just numbers on a spreadsheet. I let that settle between us, watching the realization spread across their faces. Now, I continued, here is what happens next. You will learn to live within your means. You will find investors for your business who aren't your elderly mother. You will pay your own mortgage, and your own bills, and your own children's tuitions. And maybe, just maybe, you will remember that I am a person, not a resource. Kevin's jaw tightened. This is because of Dad, isn't it? You're grieving, and you're taking it out on us. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the warmth spread through me. Your father told me something once, near the end. He said, Dorothy, don't let our children forget that you're still here. I didn't understand what he meant then. I do now. Rebecca grabbed her purse. This is ridiculous. Kevin, we should go. She's clearly not thinking straight. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, I said. And Rebecca, one more thing. The next time you seat me at the corner of a table in my own son's house, I will leave. I may be old, but I am not invisible, and I will no longer pretend otherwise. Kevin stood slowly, uncertainty flickering across his features. For a moment, he almost looked like he wanted to say something, but Rebecca's hand was on his arm, pulling him toward the door, and the moment passed. Mom, he said from the doorway, this isn't over. No, I agreed. It's just beginning. After they left, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and let the stillness wash over me. I expected to feel guilt or doubt or the familiar pull of maternal instinct urging me to fix what I had broken. But what I felt instead was something calmer, more grounded. the peace of finally standing in my own truth. The phone calls continued throughout the day. Linda's voice, wavering between anger and tears. Kevin's short, clipped messages, demanding explanations. Rebecca's icy silence, which somehow communicated more than words could. I didn't answer any of them. Some spaces need to be held open, even when the world rushes to fill them. 3 days later, a different kind of visitor arrived. Grandma. Maisie stood on my doorstep, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Can I come in?" I opened the door wide, and she stepped inside, bringing with her the smell of winter air and the energy of someone who had come with purpose. "Mom and Dad are losing their minds," she said, settling onto my couch. "They keep talking about lawyers and competency hearings and—" She stopped, seeing my expression. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't come to tell you what they're saying. I came to ask if you're okay." I sat down beside her, touched by the simple sincerity of the question. "I'm okay," I said. "Better than okay, actually." She nodded slowly, processing this. "Grandpa always said you were stronger than anyone gave you credit for." "He did. All the time." She smiled, a little sadly. "He said you held everything together so quietly that people forgot you were the one holding it." My eyes stung, but I didn't look away. "The lake house," Maisie said carefully. "It's really yours." "It is." She was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm glad. I have good memories there, from when I was little, before everything got so complicated." I took her hand, feeling the warmth of her youth, the steadiness that reminded me so much of Richard. "Those memories are safe," I said. "The house isn't going anywhere." She stayed for 2 hours. We made hot chocolate and looked through old photo albums, and she told me about school and her friends and the boy she liked but was too shy to talk to. Normal grandmother-granddaughter things. Things that had become rare in our family's rush toward ambition and acquisition. When she finally left, she hugged me longer than usual. "Don't let them make you feel bad," she whispered. "You did the right thing." After she was gone, I sat by my window and watched the evening settle over the city. Somewhere out there, my children were struggling with the unfamiliar weight of their own lives. It wasn't comfortable to know that. A mother never stops wanting to ease her children's burdens. But there's a difference between helping someone carry a weight and carrying it for them. The first builds strength. The second breeds dependence. I had spent too many years doing the second, and now we were all paying the price of that misdirected love. A week passed. Then 2. The frantic calls slowed to a trickle, then stopped almost entirely. I didn't know if that meant they had given up or were regrouping for a new approach. Either way, I used the time to settle into this new version of myself, the version that said no without apology and held boundaries without guilt. I visited the lake house on a gray December morning. The water was steel-colored and still, reflecting the bare trees that lined the shore. I sat on Richard's dock, wrapped in his old fishing jacket, and let myself remember he would have been proud of me, I thought. Not for the money or the accounts or the legal maneuvering, but for finally valuing myself the way he always had. On the drive back to the city, my phone rang. Linda's name appeared on the screen. I pulled over and answered. "Mom?" Her voice was small, stripped of pretense. "Can we talk?" I waited. "I know I should have said something at Thanksgiving," she continued. "When Kevin announced the sale, I knew it was wrong, but I just sat there because I didn't want to make waves. I've been doing that my whole life, haven't I? Staying quiet to keep the peace. We all have our patterns," I said gently. She took a shaky breath. "Thomas and we've been looking at our finances. Really looking. For the first time in years. We spent so much because we knew you'd cover the gaps. We didn't even realize we were doing it until the gaps stopped being covered." I listened without interrupting. "I'm not calling to ask for money," Linda said quickly. "I just wanted to tell you that I understand. Maybe not completely, but I'm starting to." You spent your whole life taking care of everyone else, and we never even asked if you were okay." Tears slipped down my cheeks, unexpected and warm. "Thank you," I whispered, "for seeing that." We talked for an hour, my car parked on the side of a country road while the winter light faded around me. Linda told me about her marriage, her fears, her growing realization that she had been living beyond her means in more ways than financial. She wasn't asking for solutions. She was just talking, woman to woman, the way we should have been talking for years. When we finally hung up, I felt something crack open inside me, something that had been frozen for a long time. The drive home felt different, lighter. 2 weeks before Christmas, Kevin came to see me. Not with Rebecca this time, not with demands or accusations, just him, standing on my doorstep with a bottle of wine I knew he couldn't really afford. "Can I come in?" he asked. His voice was softer than I'd heard it in years. Stripped of the corporate polish, he sounded almost like the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I stepped aside. He sat at my kitchen table, turning the wine bottle in his hands without opening it. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said, about being an ATM." I waited. He looked up at me, and for the first time in decades, I saw real uncertainty in his eyes. "I didn't see it," he admitted. "How much we were taking, how little we were giving back. I kept telling myself that you wanted to help, that it made you happy." "It did make me happy," I said, "at first. Helping your children is what parents do. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as a convenience. And I let you, because saying no felt like failing." He was quiet for a long moment. "The lake house," he said finally. "I did some research, looked at Dad's actual will, not just what I assumed it said." I nodded. "It's yours," he continued. "It was always going to be yours. Dad made sure of that." He did. Kevin set down the wine bottle and met my eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom. Not just for the dinner or the announcement or any of that. I'm sorry for years. For not visiting except when I needed something. For letting Rebecca put you in the corner. For never asking how you were doing after Dad died. Not really." His voice cracked on the last words, and suddenly he wasn't a 47-year-old businessman anymore. He was just a boy who had lost his father and never properly grieved. I reached across the table and took his hand. "I miss him too," I said. "Every day." Kevin's eyes filled with tears. "Why didn't you tell us? When we were being so awful, why didn't you just tell us to stop?" "Because I needed you to figure it out yourselves," I said. "Some lessons can't be taught. They have to be learned." We sat together as the evening darkened outside, talking in a way we hadn't talked in years. He told me about the pressure he felt to succeed, about his fear of becoming his father's failure, about the way Rebecca's expectations had shaped him into someone he barely recognized. I listened without judging. A mother's job, I realized, isn't to fix her children's problems. It's to be present while they figure out how to fix them themselves. Before he left, Kevin hugged me. A real hug, the kind that requires you to be vulnerable. "I want to do better," he said into my shoulder. "I don't know how yet, but I want to try." "That's all I've ever wanted," I told him. "For you to be the man your father knew you could be." Christmas was quiet that year. I spent it at the lake house, alone except for Maisie, who had asked her parents' permission to join me. We decorated a small tree with ornaments Richard and I had collected over the years, and I told her stories about each one, while the fire crackled and snow fell softly outside. On Christmas morning, Linda called to wish me well. Kevin sent a text, simple and sincere. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Thinking of you." It wasn't the grand reconciliation of a movie ending. There were still hard conversations ahead, boundaries to be maintained, trust to be rebuilt. Rebecca remained distant, and I suspected she always would, but that was all right. I had learned that you can't force people to see what they're not ready to see. You can only hold your ground and wait. The morning after Christmas, I woke early and walked down to the dock. The lake was frozen at the edges, mist rising from the water like breath. I sat in Richard's chair and watched the sun climb over the trees, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, the one who sat in corners and swallowed silence and wrote checks to buy love that should have been freely given. She seemed far away now, like a photograph of someone I used to know. "I'm not angry anymore," I said aloud, to Richard, to myself, to whatever part of the universe might be listening. "I'm not sad. I'm just finally here, fully, completely here." A bird called out from somewhere in the trees. The mist began to lift, and I sat on my dock, on my property, in my life, feeling for the first time in longer than I could remember, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for permission to exist. I had been one of them, giving and giving until there was almost nothing left to give. But loss has a way of clarifying things, of showing you what matters when everything else falls away. I mattered. My peace mattered, my boundaries, my dignity, my right to be seen as a person rather than a resource. They all mattered. And if my children had to struggle a little to understand that, well, struggle builds character. It's how we grow. I had protected them from that truth for too long, and in doing so, I had stunted us all. Now we were growing again, painfully sometimes, but growing. The sun was fully up now, sparkling on the ice at the lake's edge. I stood slowly, feeling the cold in my joints, but not minding it. Pain is just the body's way of reminding you that you're still alive, still capable of feeling, still here. I walked back up to the house, where Maisie was probably just waking up, where coffee was waiting to be made, and a new day was waiting to be lived. Behind me, the dock stood solid and unchanged, built by hands that had loved me without condition. And ahead of me, for the first time in years, the future looked like something I got to choose. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.